Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm your ever-living host, Shorty. I'm going to be Ferocious today. So, another one of the Mad Cave Studios ones, and yes, I am still absolutely riding the high of Mad Cave Studios comic books being available to me again. And also, feels kind of cool that I get to do another, fantasy-style comic book. We get asked for fantasy stories a bit more often than I think we would have done. Usually, I can point people towards D&D-esque Critical Role kind of stuff, and it scratches at it to a certain degree. But more things in a Conan barbaric kind of way, I think people do want to read. I reviewed one earlier, which was basically feeling very Joe Abercrombie-esque. This one doesn't go down that route, but it still plays around in the fantasy noir kind of area. There is still far more death and destruction than you would get in more family-friendly kind of fantasy, but it doesn't quite go as far. Now, what it does do is try to do that whole thing that I really like fantasy and sci-fi doing, which is not being about what you think it's about. Now, I cannot speak with absolute authority on what it actually is about. It's issue one. There is room for stories to grow. There's room for characters to develop. There's room for ideas to ferment. But my initial reaction was that this is actually a story about how we fear people who look different than us. And yes, this is not like a groundbreaking story, but I have absolutely no problem with it being a story that still keeps getting told in today's modern climate. In this particular case, we have a human fantasy medieval-esque civilization and a bunch of larger than human sized demonic looking creatures, or actually fully intelligent sentient race of individuals, and apparently there's some kind of war going on. Now, it's the comic book is kind of careful to not get into too many details about why the war is going on, who's invaded who is the aggressor, who's the defender, which is one of those things that just makes you think it could be leading to the reveal of it not being what we expect. But like I say, it's kind of Route One storytelling, but not in a bad way. It is a story that needs to be told, and they're handling it well by letting it build slowly. Now, it could go other directions. There could be many opportunities to talk about other real world events, or just lean into fantasy tropes and have a lot of fun in that world. All of that is absolutely fine, but I'm enjoying the story and I'm enjoying how it looks. How it looks, though, is one of the things that actually made me doubt it a little bit when I first opened it, because it's got a very soft, easygoing colour palette for the chapter one, shall we say. Chapter 2 then goes for a fully violent, brutal, kinetic action sequence over several pages, where the colours are considerably richer. There's a lot more depth and dark and shade to it, never losing the dynamic nature of the emotion on the page, which is really, really good. And then the final chapter, where we basically get most of the exposition and setup for what's going to be happening for the rest of the comic book, falls back into that little slightly softer, more easygoing colour palette. And wouldn't really be that much of an issue. I like the idea of using colour to tell a story in that way. I think that's actually why I really enjoy people like Jordi Belair, and when colorists play around with colour meaning different times and different events, I like that kind of thing. In this case, though, when I first opened it, I thought the thick, heavy line work on the character outlines was a bit much. I totally lost that in the fight scene because everything was that deeper, darker, richer colour. The heavy black on the dark colours was nowhere near as obvious, nowhere near as jarring. But then when we went back to the tail end of it, I did notice it again, and it's just one of those things that, not technically terrible way of doing artwork, but it just doesn't work well for me. In terms of the rest of it, though, the characters are actually pretty damn good. We don't get a whole bunch of time with too many of them. The action sequence takes up a significant portion. The setup few pages gives a little bit of an idea of who one of our main characters is, the young white boy who discovers the creature in the woods, or in the swamp, I think it is. And then the follow-up after that, we get a little bit more time with him, but it's far more about the creature at this point. When I say creature, yes, I do mean fully sentient, able to communicate with a sense of humour and able to communicate quickly, easily, and wittily. Then yes, I'm using creature because that's how the comic book seems to want you to think of it. But they do both come across really well written. There's also fantastic dialogue between the various characters, and there's enough that we've already got that I think we're going to get some more lore, which I quite like. I'm a fantasy fan, and I like the idea that we're not just going to get a story in a generic fantasy world, that we're actually going to get told a little bit more about it, and that's going to add more depth to the world that the characters inhabit and thus make the characters better. And because I was a little bit harsh on the artist, I'm going to point out the actual character design is really, really good. That fight sequence was fantastic, and even the costume design and the world all look brilliant. There's just something about that dark, heavy, thick line with a light colour palette just look kind of odd to me. That's it for me for now, though. Until I see you all again, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe.